chapter 18 of the book of Acts. So Paul has just gone through all of what's taken place in Athens, and he moves on. That was Paul's calling, going from one place to another to another. Other people helped to grow. Other people took care of weeds consistently. Other people had places where they were as they went forward. Now he comes to Corinth. And yes, this is where Paul writes, this is the place where Paul writes to the Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians later on. Now, as he comes to Corinth, this is also the place where he writes 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So as he comes to this place, this is his writing of those two books as he's doing the work here in Corinth. And so leaving Athens, going to Corinth, verse 18, or chapter 18, verse 1 through 4. After this, all the things in Athens, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. Corinth, a center place right on the isthmus of Greece, basically a very center area for seafaring trade. And so it was a very populated area, very well known, very much could go out very easily, very quickly to the whole Roman world. It was a center commercial place in the Roman Empire. And so as he was there as he's there in Corinth, verse 2, and he, Paul, found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, northern Asia Minor, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. So you have Aquila and Priscilla. And we'll see in a moment here, they were tent makers by trade. And they were from northern Asia Minor, think kind of northern Turkish area, having gone to Rome and having finished in Rome. And why? We'll get to that in a minute. Now come to Corinth. Paul, as we've seen throughout the book of Acts, continually goes to the Jews first wherever he goes. As we'll see in a couple of verses, even he goes to the synagogue immediately. So, and talks and shares there. But here he finds, as he goes forward to the marketplace where he would feel comfortable knowing those things, he goes forward and talks to Priscilla and Aquila, who become major helpers in his mission work and become leaders in the church as well. Now, why did they have to leave Rome? Because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Now, we're talking here 49 AD is when Claudius cast the Jews out of Rome. And this is a very key thing just to kind of note right here. The historicity of the scriptures. Many and various, but I want to just point out right here, because the Roman historian Suetonius is his name. He wrote the history of Rome, of the Roman Empire. Now, he writes specifically about this case where Claudius cast the Jews out of Rome. And the central reasoning is very important, because the reasoning why Claudius did this, and looking at 49 AD, was because of squabbling over Christus, Christ. This all happened because of arguing within themselves. And then, of course, it spills over because the gospel keeps spreading out. With all of this taking place, it goes forward. And because of the arguing about Christ, and I don't want to get into the arguing, what I want to point out here is that in the midst of this, here you have 49 AD. There having to be a response. There's a response by the government about Jesus Christ. And here you're talking 16 years after Jesus was raised from the dead. 16 years from that to in Rome, the government steps forward and makes it known this is why we are having to make these decisions and cast the Jews out, because of squabbling about Christus, about Christ. The historicity, immediately this happened. This is not a fictional type thing. This is nonfiction. that this happened and took place at this time, just looking at the history, is really without discussion. It happened and took place. Now, with all of that having been said, uh, he went to see them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. Most Pharisees had another way of working. They were tent makers. Tent makers, leather workers, it would be the same Greek word. So it allowed you to do other things besides just tents. But absolutely, tent making was part and parcel of it. And what did Paul do? He reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade the Jews and the Greeks. So as he's there, again, he goes to the synagogue, but also in the marketplace. Notice he did that in Athens, both. He does that here, showing for the church as well. What are we called on to do? Share, reason, point to Christus, point to Christ of all that he has done for us in his holy